There are a lot of resources out there, some good, some bad, that talk about how to start investing. But few, if any, talk about the three most important things you should know before you consider clicking the buy button. And these three things apply equally to diversified ETFs or individual stocks that you're hoping will go to the moon. And what's interesting about the three things that I'm going to talk about shortly is that they have nothing to do with intellect, skill, or education, but are perhaps just as important, if not more so, than all those three things. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Number one, time horizon. If you're going to invest in stocks or ETFs, the first thing you need to understand is your own time horizon. That is, to put it simply, how long are you going to invest for before you need to touch the money? If you're planning to save for a down payment to purchase a house in the next 2 to 3 years and you invest in stock or equity ETFs, when you want to pull the trigger on buying your home, the stock market may be down and you might be sitting on an unrealized loss. So your options may be to delay your purchase or to actually realize the loss and make up for the shortfall through other sources. This would be a terrible situation to be in, as generally speaking, when the market's down, that presents a very good buying opportunity and you'd be doing precisely the opposite. Furthermore, if your time horizon is short, the growth rate of your portfolio makes less of an impact than your contributions. So you're better off trying to save more aggressively than trying to aim for a higher growth rate, which will carry a higher risk. You can see that over a 5-year period, a greater proportion of your total final amount comes from contributions, but over 20 years, a much larger proportion comes from the growth rate. So if you're saving for a short-term goal, it's better to save more and invest conservatively. The same goes for buying a car, saving for an emergency fund, saving for a vacation, or saving for a wedding. These are all short-term goals with short time horizons, and you have to invest accordingly. Saving up for retirement, however, generally will have a longer time horizon, and you can comfortably invest in equities since you won't need to probably touch the money for many years or decades. Other long time horizon goals include saving for your children's education, assuming your children are very young, or leaving a legacy. Goals with shorter time horizons include saving up for a car, an emergency fund, or a vacation or a wedding. This is not an exhaustive list, but generally speaking, for short to medium time horizon goals, appropriate investments or places to keep your money would be checking account, savings account, guaranteed return ETFs or GICs. And for long time horizon goals, you might want to consider diversified ETFs or real estate, etc. Number two, risk tolerance. Even if you have a longer time horizon, you have to figure out your risk tolerance. Are you okay with unrealized losses of 10%, 20%, or 50% or more in your investments? If you're up 50%, do you get the urge to sell? Answering questions like these may not be enough, and you might actually have to live through it. So I recommend starting off with relatively low risk investments and taking on more risk gradually until you start to feel slightly uncomfortable. At the very basic level, risk is volatility, and there are many measures of volatility. There's standard deviation of returns, the number of days the stock or ETF makes 1% daily moves, the maximum drawdown, and the frequency of large 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% drawdowns. So it helps to know stats like these for any stock or ETF that you invest in. When you consider the S&P 500, which is the most popular index, there's widely available stats like this for it. Since 1945, the S&P has experienced 15 bear markets defined as a decline of 20% or more, and the frequency of these bear markets have been about once every 5 years, with each bear market lasting about a year. The frequency of a correction, which is defined as a decline in the market of about 10 to 20%, is about once every 1.7 years. Since 1945, even with taking into account all the bear markets and corrections, the S&P has returned 7.43% after inflation annually, meaning you would be doubling your money about every 10 years. For individual stocks, taking Apple stock as an example, since 1986, Apple has had an inflation-adjusted CAGR of 19.61%. $10,000 invested back then would be worth $9 million today, inflation-adjusted. However, Apple lost 80% of its value during the dot-com crash and another 57% of its value during the Great Recession. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, experienced a maximum drawdown of 32% since 1985, and it is a much less volatile stock, although it did yield a CAGR of 9.31% after inflation. Number 3, asset allocation. So maybe you've concluded that you're comfortable taking on more risk. Even then, you need to understand asset allocation. Maybe you want to invest in something speculative, or maybe you want to take a position in an individual stock. Well, the question you have to ask yourself is, how much should you allocate to that specific position? What proportion of your portfolio should be allocated to that stock or investment? Now, this is going to be personal and is going to differ from individual to individual, but personally for me, I would say I would want 90% of my positions to be in diversified ETFs with about 10% allocated to speculative positions, if at all. But that's just me. And your asset allocation will depend on you, your individual circumstances, and your risk tolerance. One of the things I keep hearing is people saying, Warren Buffett purchased so-and-so stock, so I'm going to buy that too. Well, that's all well and good, but you have to ask yourself, what proportion of his portfolio is he allocating to that particular stock? And if you want to be logically consistent, you have to mirror that asset allocation as well, which for a lot of people might mean that they might have to invest only a few $100 or $1,000 or $2,000 into that particular position. And that brings me to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Have a great day.